Do you know this feeling? When you look out of the window of a tall building and suddenly a strange, almost silent thought whispers inside your head. What if I jumped? It's not a clear desire to die, nor a genuine impulse, but a fleeting idea, like a mental shadow that crosses your mind. Or when you're driving at night with an empty road ahead, and you find yourself imagining turning the wheel sharply, ending everything right there in a second. It's scary to admit, but it happens more often than you might think. And more importantly, it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. In fact, this experience is so common that it even has a name, l'appel du vide, or, translated from French, the call of the void. This psychological phenomenon intrigues experts and philosophers. For psychology, the call of the void is a paradoxical manifestation of the survival instinct, a way for the brain to recognize imminent danger in order to reaffirm the desire to live. It's as if, when we glimpse the abyss, we reaffirm our commitment to life, telling ourselves, "You're not going to do this." But there is another, deeper layer, which goes to the heart of existential philosophy. Why are we drawn to the edge? Why does the abyss stare back at us? It's not necessarily the desire to die, but the confrontation with absolute freedom, the astonishment at the fact that nothing, in fact, stops us, except ourselves. Albert Camus dedicated a significant part of his work to this dilemma. In The Myth of Sisyphus, he states that suicide is the only truly serious philosophical question. Faced with the apparent meaninglessness of the world, we must ask ourselves, should I kill myself, or should I have a cup of coffee? A provocation that reveals the heart of the philosophy of the absurd. For Camus, life is a cycle of repetitions with no ultimate purpose. We are born, we struggle, we suffer, and, inevitably, we die. And even knowing this, we insist on continuing. What drives us on in the face of this awareness of the absurd? Camus proposes a bold answer: rebellion. Not a violent revolt, but a silent refusal to give up. When we are confronted by emptiness, it doesn't invite us to jump, but to reflect. It demands that we become aware of our condition. The call of the void is a brutal reminder of the fragility and freedom we have. And contrary to appearances, resisting it is an affirmative gesture. It's the silent cry of those who understand that life doesn't need to have an external purpose to be meaningful. The beauty lies precisely in choosing to live, despite everything. It's true. Life has no inherent meaning. We are not born with a mission written in the stars, nor with a destiny traced out by some superior force. We live, we die. And from the point of view of the universe, none of this seems to matter. But this realization, which at first glance may seem paralyzing, can be precisely what sets us free. What we understand as meaning is a construction of the human mind, an effort to give shape to the chaos that surrounds us. This is why what is valuable to one person may be irrelevant to another, because each of us projects onto the world what we want to see, what we need to see in order to go on. To rebel against emptiness, as Camus proposes, is to accept that there is no prefabricated purpose, and yet continue living as if there were. It is an act of existential courage, and this rebellion is only possible because we are aware of the absurd. The call of the void, no matter how disturbing, forces us to face this reality. When the idea of disappearing visits us, it's not exactly a death wish, but a direct confrontation with the absence of meaning. We are faced with point zero, the blank page, the space where all answers seem to have failed. And it is precisely there that the essential question arises. What is the point of all this? Camus doesn't answer with ready-made formulas. He doesn't promise salvation or consolation. What he offers is an ethic of lucidity, to live fully, even knowing that the world is indifferent to our existence. For him, the absurd hero is the one who doesn't run away from the truth, but faces it head-on and still chooses to live. However, this approach still leaves a gap. If the world is meaningless and everything depends solely on our attitude, Where does this impulse to seek answers come from? Why do we feel this deep discomfort in the face of emptiness? This is where the philosophy of Søren Kierkegaard, considered the father of existentialism, comes into play with another equally powerful perspective. Kierkegaard doesn't deny the absurd, but he understands this confrontation as a spiritual crisis. For him, the emptiness we feel is actually a reflection of our freedom. We are free to choose, free to give meaning, free even to destroy ourselves. But this absolute freedom is accompanied by intense anguish, a feeling of vertigo at the infinity of possibilities. The abyss, then, is not an invitation to end, but a window into our deepest autonomy. It is at this point of tension that existence becomes truly human, when we stop looking for a ready-made meaning and start creating our own path. Kierkegaard believed that the call of emptiness is not a real desire to die, but a silent proof of our freedom. For him, this feeling is not pathological, but existential. It is the intimate recognition that we are free to choose, even not to continue. This radical freedom frightens us, because it exposes us to the fact that no external structure can protect us from ourselves. Life, in this sense, is not a straight line guided by fixed rules, but an open terrain where every step is our responsibility. And it is precisely in this space of uncertainty that anguish arises, not as an error of the mind, but as a revelation of conscience. Kierkegaard called this feeling existential anguish, a vertigo in the face of the possible. It's like looking from the top of a cliff and knowing that you could jump, not because you want to, but because you can. This is the essence of human freedom. Anguish, then, is not weakness. It comes from the fact that we are capable of transcending, of imagining alternatives, of acting against instinct. Instead of denying this experience, Kierkegaard invites us to accept it as part of the journey towards authenticity. And this is where his best-known notion comes in, the leap of faith. When we are faced with emptiness, with all our certainties dissolved, the leap of faith is a gesture of surrender. Not an irrational submission, but a deep trust that there is something beyond anguish. Something that can only be accessed by accepting the unknown. For Kierkegaard, this leap is not made with the feet, but with the spirit. It's the choice to live even without guarantees, to love without promises, to follow without maps. And this leap is an intimate, solitary act that no one can do for you. This perspective turns the temptation to give up into a powerful reminder. We are free even to give up, but we are also free to continue. And continuing, even in the face of doubt, is what makes life profoundly human. At this point, it's worth remembering the phrase of Seneca, the Stoic philosopher. Sometimes even living is an act of courage. Although Kierkegaard and the Stoics think differently, they both recognize that suffering is an inevitable part of life. And it is in this suffering that our freedom is put to the test. When everything seems meaningless, when the burden becomes unbearable, the decision to keep breathing, to get out of bed, to try one more time, that in itself is a form of resistance. This is where we begin to find bridges between existentialism and stoicism. If the former shows us that we are free, even when everything falls apart, the latter reminds us that this freedom makes sense when it is guided by reason, by duty, by love for those around us. And sometimes it is precisely the reminder that someone depends on us that prevents us from heeding the call of the void. It's the gaze of a parent, the memory of a friend, the commitment to something greater than pain. Seneca, a thinker deeply influenced by the principles of Stoicism, found himself facing this dilemma with the real weight of pain. Not a metaphysical or theoretical pain, but a constant bodily pain that seemed to have no end. Attacked by a debilitating illness, he considered the possibility of suicide not as cowardice, but as a legitimate relief. A way to cease the suffering that threatened to consume everything. And yet, on the brink of the end, there was a moment of silence. A space between impulse and decision, in which his mind turned beyond himself. He thought of his elderly father, frail but present. He thought of the love he received from him, and the impact his absence would have. Suffering was no longer just an individual issue, and it was at this point that his perspective changed. This pause, as small as it was decisive, reveals one of the most subtle facets of Stoic philosophy. The awareness that we are not islands. Although Stoicism emphasizes inner strength and rational autonomy in the face of adversity, it also recognizes that we live in community. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest exponents of Stoicism, wrote that, "What is not useful to the hive is also not useful to the bee." This means that our actions, even those we consider personal, reverberate in the world around us. Seneca's suffering continued, but he realized that there was something deeper than physical pain: the connection with those who love us and suffer with us. Living, at that moment, was not an impulsive choice of hope. It was a thoughtful, painful decision to remain in the midst of chaos for the sake of the other. It's not uncommon that, in the darkest moments, the memory of someone we love is the thread that holds us to life. And although this thread may seem fragile, it is often stronger than any abstract idea of purpose. But this brings us to a more complex question. Is living for the sake of others enough? Is life only worth living when it is sustained by the emotional bonds that surround us? Perhaps there is no single answer. Perhaps living for someone else is just the first step, an initial impulse that pushes us away from the edge. Then comes reconstruction, the search for a broader meaning, not given, but created by us. The philosophers we've come across so far, Camus, Kierkegaard, the Stoics, have all recognized that absurdity, anguish, and pain are inevitable. But they also pointed out, each in their own way, that the answer never lies in running away. The answer lies in facing it. And when we face the emptiness, when we feel that silent call, we are being invited to ask the hardest questions. It's not about giving up. It's about understanding why we're still here. Camus taught us that the true response to absurdity is rebellion. A silent, intimate rebellion that doesn't need flags or external victories. We reject suicide not out of attachment to an illusory hope, but as a radical affirmation of life, even without guarantees. Living, then, is a constant decision. It is the act of creating meaning in a world that spontaneously offers us none. Kierkegaard shows us that this choice is born of freedom. The call of the void is not the end, but the exact point where we discover that we can choose, even between despair and trust. When it whispers in our ears during the quietest moments, on the deserted road, in the dark room, in deep insomnia, it is saying, you are free. Free to end it all, but also free to carry on, even if you don't understand everything. And Seneca, with his stoic serenity, reminds us that the greatest courage can lie in simply moving on. Living beyond pain, for ourselves and for others. Life doesn't require great daily feats, but a firmness of spirit that resists collapse, that decides to carry on even when nothing seems to make sense. When we choose to live another day, we are not denying emptiness. We are responding to it with dignity. We are saying that our existence may be absurd, but it doesn't have to be passive. We can transform pain into awareness, doubt into lucidity, freedom into commitment. And maybe that's exactly why I keep creating this kind of content. Because I know that these reflections reach people who, in silence, have also looked into the abyss. If this video spoke to you, if it made you think, if it helped you in any way to see more clearly what seemed incommunicable, I invite you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps immensely to spread these ideas and keep this space for reflection alive. And if you feel in your heart that this work deserves to continue, you can offer any amount of support. Your help strengthens this work and allows more content like this to reach more people who, perhaps right now, need to hear something like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt the call of the void? What made you choose to continue? I really want to know. Your story could touch other people too. And remember, sometimes simply living is the most revolutionary gesture we can make.